Hi, and thanks for joining with me today. If it's your first time here, a very warm welcome. This is a channel about all things religious and spiritual, especially the history of ancient religious movements. So if you like that subject, of course, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Please leave me any comments or questions you might have. I do my very best to answer them. Well, we're in the middle of a series about Egyptian religion, and I also started a series about the funeral or burial customs of different people groups and how they relate to their religious beliefs. And in this particular video, that addresses both of those topics. Today we're going to talk about mummies, and I want to begin by bringing your attention to this book about Egyptian mummies. It was printed in 1994, but you should be able to get a hold of a copy of it today. It's entitled Egyptian Mummies, Unraveling the Secrets of an Ancient Art. It's by Bob Brier, professor at Long Island University. And Professor Brier is an Egyptologist. He's also known as Mr. Mummy as a result of his work right about this time in 1994, when he and associates mummified an unembalmed human cadaver. They did this at the University of Maryland Medical School in the U.S. And before you're alarmed, this was the body of a man who had donated his remains to science for scientific research. I want to mention the National Geographic special that was made about that time called Ancient Graves, Voices of the Dead. And I will put a link to that in the description box, and also the information about Professor Brier's books. Now, in the first 20 minutes of this program, along with some general information, they show part of the process of Professor Brier and associates embalming, mummifying this cadaver. Well, the ancient Egyptians did not leave us any detailed instructions about how they did this process, but thousands and thousands of people were mummified. Even some animals were preserved through this process, and their mummies have been found as well. Everybody wanted to be mummified. The preservation of the body was what was going to make it possible to participate in the next world. There were several gradations of the process available. And just like when we're pricing a funeral today in the U.S., people made choices that were affordable to them. Therefore, of course, wealthy people had more elaborate preparation than poor people. Well, what happened when a person died and they wanted their body to be mummified? Well, the first 4 days after death, the body remained in the home of the deceased, and that was the time when relatives and friends came, paid their respects, and mourned over their loss. And then those same family and friends arranged for the transportation of the body across the Nile to the western shore of the river. That's where the embalmers worked. They just placed the body in a plain wooden box, and by boat he was towed across the river. Once the other shore was met, a procession led from the shore to the purification tent, and this was set up to resemble a temple. And here prayers were said and various rituals were performed. And then the body was again processed, this time to the embalmer's workshop. This workshop would have contained several rooms for the different processes that the person would then go through. It might also have been that the work was done outside. Let me read a note from Professor Brier's memo to his university when he was requesting that he be allowed to do this at Long Island University. And this is just an excerpt. It said, the god of embalming, Anubis, was called he who is in his tent, and also he who is upon his hill. This suggests that the mummification took place out of doors, on a hill, under a tent. And this may have been necessary because of the odors associated with mummification. And so his request was, I thus would like to work under a tent. A remote area of the campus would be best. And he suggests a couple of places. Of course, as it turned out, Long Island University refused his request at that time, but the University of Maryland opened their doors to his research. Well, here the body would be washed and the inner organs would be removed. The brain would be taken out through the nostrils using a long hook. And when Professor Brier performed this procedure, he discovered that was very difficult, and in the video and also in the book explains how they eventually figured out how to do this, to remove the brain with just this hook. Apparently the brain was discarded as being unimportant because the remains of the brains were never seen again. Well, the rest of the organs were removed by making a slit approximately 7 inches long with a sharp stone, an extremely sharp stone, in the side of the abdomen. And the other organs were pulled out through this slit. Some of the organs were preserved and placed in canopy jars that are going to be interned with the body. And then the intestinal cavity was washed out, cleansed, and was then stuffed full of spices. Now the heart was left in place. And why was that? Well, it was because the Egyptians believed that the heart was the center, it was the manager of the body. They gave to the heart what we sometimes think of as the position of the brain today. So the heart was left in place. And it would be the one organ that was absolutely needed at all times in the afterlife. Then this body was covered with natron. Now, natron is a naturally occurring substance that can be found in a couple of places in Egypt. It's basically baking soda and salt. And so the body was completely covered in this substance, and this dehydrated the body. It remained in this natron for about 36 days, possibly 39, a little bit longer, but about 36 days. And then once it was dehydrated, the body was wrapped in strips of linen. And of course, with each strip of linen, prayers would be said and rituals would be performed. Now it's interesting that these strips of linen were from used cloth. They were things like sheets or old clothing, and that was what was used. Now the last thing that was done in the mummification process, again with prayers being said, was to open the mouth of the mummy so that he or she would be able to speak and breathe in the afterlife. Well, at this point, the relatives would return and they're given the body by the priests to be put in their final resting place. The entire process takes 70 days. 7 and 70 are sacred numbers in ancient Egyptian religion. Now, all of this is done with the ritual prayers and ceremonies being performed, as I mentioned. Sometimes the embalmer wears a mask representing Anubis, god of the dead, while performing his task. Or the priest wears this mask while saying the prayers as the embalmer works. Now, a part of the time frame can be confirmed in the Jewish scriptures. And let me again read just a portion from this book. If you have the book, this is on page 55. The Bible confirms this time frame. When Joseph was in Egypt, he was joined by his father Jacob, who was called Israel, who eventually died there. In Genesis 50:1-3, we are told, and Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, for so many are required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. Thus the immersion in natron, etc., took approximately 40 days, leaving 30 days for rituals. Well, if possible, as you'll see in my video on what we can learn from the tombs, the deceased is provided with grave goods. Of course, the pharaohs and the elite citizens had elaborate tombs. They were filled with much wealth. Probably most of us have seen the most elaborate tomb that has been found and filmed, that of Tutankhamun. But for poorer people, as much grave goods would be provided as could be spared. The rich had caskets of precious metals like gold and silver. Others had wooden caskets in the shape of a human body. Well, all of this was done with an emphasis on preparing for the next life. That was central to Egyptian ancient religion. Now, a note about the tombs of the wealthy. Mortuary temples were built beside the pyramids and tombs of wealthy, where priests were paid to make appropriate offerings for the care of the dead. And this was supposed to be a perpetual service on behalf of the pharaoh or the person who had died. Now, these were usually family businesses that could be passed down from father to son. And it appears also that those who practiced the embalmer's craft had a family type business with the same passing from father to son. Well, this has given us a look into the process that the Egyptians used to prepare those who had passed for the next life. I hope that you've found it informative and will check out some of the other videos I've done about Egyptian religion. And I hope that you'll join with me next time for a look at another religious or spiritual movement. In the meantime, please stay safe and well, and I'll see you real soon.